in that cold, formal room where my father Arthur Bennett's will was to be read. My stepmother Brenda and my half-brother Kyle had already declared their victory. They didn't even look at me when I walked in. Brenda sat in the middle of the long walnut table like a queen at court, her pearl earrings catching the light just enough to dazzle. She was smiling, too wide, too proud. Next to her, my half-brother Kyle leaned back in his chair, hands folded behind his head, that smirk on his face like he'd already won something. Maybe he thought he had. I hadn't even taken a seat when she said it. "He loved me," Brenda said, her voice silky and sharp. Not the child of his first mistake. She didn't even blink. Kyle chuckled beside her. "She's not even in the paperwork," he added with a grin that made my stomach turn. The room erupted in soft laughter, restrained, polite, the kind that pretends not to be cruel. I stood there, coat still on, purse clutched tight in my hand, like an outsider stepping into someone else's home. But this was my father's home once, mine too, in another life. I took the only empty seat at the far end of the table, the seat no one else wanted. My pulse thudded behind my ears. I scanned the faces around me. Lawyers in stiff suits, a few distant cousins, family friends who hadn't spoken to me since my mom passed. Everyone seemed comfortable, at ease, like they knew how this would go. I forced my expression into something resembling composure, even though my hands were shaking in my lap. I wasn't surprised Brenda was gloating. What surprised me was how confident she looked, like she had seen the future and already signed her name at the bottom of it. What was behind this confidence? Was it just greed? Or were there other secrets I didn't know? The lawyer, Mr. Granger, entered moments later. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe just tired. He carried a dark leather briefcase, the kind that clicks open like a gun being cocked. All eyes turned to him. Silence fell like a curtain. "Thank you all for coming," he said, setting the briefcase on the table. "As you know, we're here to read the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Bennett, my father, or the man who used to be my father." It had been years since we last spoke. Years since I walked out of his house after he told me he couldn't afford to hold on to the past anymore. That was what he called me. His past. A reminder of his first life, as he phrased it. The life with my mom. Brenda was his second wife. Younger, perfectly poised. She made sure everyone knew she was the one who helped Arthur rebuild. She'd inserted herself into every photo, every story, every memory, until it felt like I had never existed at all. And Mason, her son, half my blood, none of my heart, had followed her lead with ease. I was always the other daughter, the shadow in the background. What was I expecting from this will reading? A crumb? Or just an official confirmation that I had been completely erased? "Before I begin," Mr. Granger said, opening the briefcase, "I'd like to remind everyone that the contents of this reading are final and legally binding." Brenda leaned forward, lips pursed in anticipation. Kyle elbowed her lightly like it was a game they were about to win together. At that moment, the knot in my stomach tightened even more. Their victory celebration was about to be another session of humiliation for me. It was precisely then that Granger paused, just for a second. A flicker of something passed across his face. Confusion, maybe, or surprise. He reached into the case and pulled out a sealed envelope. Thick, stamped, unmistakably recent. "Actually," he said, adjusting his glasses, "your father made an amendment to the will 3 weeks ago after discovering the truth." The room stiffened. Brenda's smile faltered. Kyle's brows furrowed. "What amendment?" Brenda snapped. "That's not possible, Arthur." He was barely lucid at the end. His mind wasn't clear. At that moment, the panic in Brenda's voice planted a small seed of hope within me. Something was happening. Something they hadn't expected. Granger didn't respond to her tone. He just opened the envelope and removed a fresh stack of papers. Each one bore my father's unmistakable signature. "It's all here," he said calmly. "Signed, witnessed, legally executed." No one moved, no one breathed. I sat frozen at the end of the table, watching the color drain from Brenda's face. What truth? What could he have discovered so close to the end? I had come here expecting nothing. I was told I had nothing. And maybe that was true. But the look on Mr. Granger's face said otherwise. He wasn't looking at Brenda. He was looking at me. What was in that look? Pity or hope? The room had gone silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, the kind that charges the air and makes you hyper-aware of every heartbeat, every breath. I sat at the edge of my seat, watching as Mr. Granger slowly removed the amended will from its envelope. Brenda's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the polished wood of the table. Tap, tap, tap. She wasn't smiling anymore. "This is absurd," she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Arthur wouldn't. He was too sick. He couldn't have done this." But he had. I could see it in the lawyer's face, in the slight tremble of his hand as he adjusted the papers, his eyes scanning lines he'd probably already read a dozen times. Whatever he saw in that will, it changed things for all of us. At that moment, I felt that the fate of everyone in that room was written on those thin sheets of paper, and my fate was about to be rewritten in a way I never expected. "As I mentioned," Granger said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "This amendment was signed 3 weeks prior to Mr. Bennet's passing, in the presence of 2 witnesses and myself. Your father was of sound mind. He was deliberate and very specific." These words struck Brenda's face like a slap, but she still resisted. Kyle scoffed. "Specific," he repeated, leaning forward with that same smug grin. "Let me guess, he left his vinyl collection to the mailman and his car to the dog." But I saw the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. They were both rattled. Brenda's hand was no longer tapping. It was clenched tightly. She was staring at Granger as if he had betrayed her. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I sat still, as I'd been taught to do when I was younger. Blend into the wallpaper, stay quiet, don't provoke. Only this time, I wasn't the one who had something to hide. Their false confidence crumbling second by second was, strangely, a bitter kind of pleasure to watch. "Before I continue," Granger said, flipping to the top page, "I need to verify something. Miss Bennet, Samantha, can you come here for a moment?" It was like every head in the room turned to me at once. My chest tightened. I wasn't expecting that. I stood slowly, legs unsteady, feeling their eyes cling to me like wet fabric. I walked to the front of the room where Granger waited. He held out a small card. "My father's old ID from when I was a child. Do you recognize this?" he asked. I nodded. "That's his old signature. He stopped using it after he remarried." That signature. It was the fatherly, warm signature I remembered from my childhood birthday cards, my school report cards. Granger nodded as well, his lips tightening. "That's what I thought." He turned the document around, letting me see the scrolled name at the bottom of the amendment. It was the signature I remembered from my childhood birthday cards. Slanted, messy, always a little too large. He had signed it with his old name, Arthur L. Bennett, not the stylized AB Brenda insisted he use later in life. "He signed it with the name he used when your mother was alive," Granger added, quietly enough that only I could hear. My throat clenched. At that moment, I felt my father sending a message from the past, a salute to the past Brenda had tried so hard to erase from our lives. I stepped back, returning to my seat, heart hammering in my ears. Brenda's voice sliced through the air. "This is a trick. That signature proves nothing. He hadn't used that name in decades." "Exactly," Granger said, "which is why its sudden reappearance is significant." Kyle leaned forward again, irritation creeping into his voice. "So, what's in the will? If you're done with the dramatics, maybe we can finally hear what my father actually wanted." His impatience at that moment actually showed how scared he was. Granger gave him a long look before continuing. "Very well. As per the amended document dated 3 weeks prior to Mr. Bennet's passing, I will now begin the reading." He cleared his throat and began. At that moment, I could feel everyone in the room holding their breath. For me, this wasn't just a will reading. This was perhaps the final act of a long-standing injustice, an unacknowledged existence. To my wife, Brenda, Granger read in a stoic voice, I leave the sum of $10,000 in my sincere hope that she will find the peace she was always searching for. Brenda choked on her breath. 10,000? What? This this must be a joke. Stunned whispers rippled through the room. One of the cousins leaned in, whispering behind a hand. Another family friend coughed awkwardly. $10,000. Next to a multi-million dollar estate, it was like an insult. Brenda's face had turned ashen, her eyes wide with shock. At that moment, seeing her arrogant, queenly demeanor crumble to dust, a small, bitter piece of satisfaction settled in the wound that had been bleeding in my heart for years. Granger continued unshaken. To my stepson Kyle, I leave my golf clubs in a framed photo of our first fishing trip. I regret we never truly connected. Kyle's mouth fell open. Are you kidding me? His face flushed, eyes darting between the paper and his mother. He looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. Golf clubs and a photo. For a young man who had been led to believe he was the sole heir to his father's fortune for years, could there be a greater humiliation? Granger went on, his voice steady. And to my daughter, Samantha Bennett. I stopped breathing. At that moment, it felt as if the whole world had stopped. There was only Granger's voice and the frantic beating of my heart. I leave the remainder of my estate, including the family home, all financial holdings, savings, retirement accounts, and my personal letters. I blinked. Once, twice. Had I heard that right? Everything. To me? At that moment, as those words echoed in my brain, I didn't know what to feel. Shock, disbelief, a sliver of triumph. It was all mixed up. Brenda shot up from her chair so fast it screeched backward, almost toppling over. This is fraud! He wouldn't have done this. He couldn't have. But Granger didn't even flinch. He did, he said. And it's legal. Every word. Kyle slammed a hand on the table. She was out of his life. She doesn't deserve anything. Brenda looked ready to throw something, but neither of them noticed that I hadn't spoken, that I hadn't smiled or cried or moved at all, because something else was swirling in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not victory, not vindication, just confusion. Why? Why would my father do this? We hadn't spoken in years. The last time I called, he let it ring. The last time I wrote, I never got a reply. So, what changed? What truth had he found 3 weeks before his death? And why? Why now? At that moment, more than the size of the inheritance, it was the mysterious truth behind my father's final move that occupied my mind. This was about more than money. This was about my past, about my broken relationship with my father. The reading was over, but the aftermath hung in the room like smoke. Brenda paced like a caged animal, her heels clicking too loudly against the hardwood floor. Kyle had stormed out a few minutes earlier, slamming the heavy front door behind him so hard the walls trembled. Some of the extended family left in a wave of awkward silence and sidelong glances, clearly not sure whose side to take anymore. And me? I just sat there, still trying to understand what had happened. Not just what he gave me, but why. Mr. Granger began to organize the documents into neat stacks, avoiding my eyes, as if he already knew the questions waiting behind them. I waited until the room had emptied, leaving only the two of us. Then quietly, "Why did he do it?" I asked. He paused, fingers resting on the briefcase. "I was hoping you'd ask." He walked to a side cabinet, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a small, worn envelope. It was cream-colored, thick paper, the kind people don't use anymore. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. Sharp, decisive, unmistakable. "He gave this to me the day he signed the amendment," Granger said, offering it to me. "He told me not to show you until after everything was read." My hands trembled as I took it. There was no return address, no postmark, just my name, Samantha. Not Sam, not Sweetie, like he used to call me before things fell apart. Just my name. I didn't open it right away. I held it like it might burn me, like whatever was inside might tear open a wound I'd spent years sewing shut. Was he different that day? I asked. Granger nodded slowly. He was tired but clear. He spoke about regrets, about time he couldn't get back. And then he said something I didn't understand until now. He looked at me. He said, "Truth doesn't erase pain, but it can rewrite the ending." That line stayed with me. Still does. At that moment, I felt that the envelope in my hand held not just a letter, but my father's attempt to rewrite a conclusion. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to read that ending. I slipped the envelope into my purse, unable to face it just yet. The drive home felt like moving through water. Every red light gave me time to second-guess everything. His motives, my memory, even whether this was real. My phone buzzed on the seat next to me. Probably Kyle or Brenda, maybe both. I ignored it. At that moment, I didn't have the strength to deal with their anger or fake sorrow. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I stepped inside. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and stood in the hallway for a long moment, my coat still on, the envelope heavy in my purse. I finally sat on the edge of my bed, took it out, and opened it. The letter inside was handwritten, 4 pages, no date. Just his name signed at the bottom in the same shaky script from the will. Arthur. "Samantha," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means I waited far too long to say the things I should have said in person." The first line alone made my throat tighten. This was a voice I had longed to hear for years, yet thought I never would again. "I know I failed you. I didn't just lose your mother. I lost myself. And then I let Brenda tell me who I was supposed to be. I let her rewrite my life, and I let her turn me against you." My heart pounded. How deep had Brenda's manipulations gone? I believed things that weren't true. I stopped reading. My hands clenched around the paper. What things? What lies had been told? What had he believed about me? A wave of anger washed over me, but I kept reading. "Years ago, Brenda told me you had taken money from me, that you were using my name to apply for loans. She showed me fake emails, bank printouts. She said you were trying to ruin me out of spite." My stomach dropped. How could this be? I, who had valued honesty above all else, how could I be the target of such vile slander? I believed her, and I didn't ask you. I didn't even give you a chance to explain. I just decided I was done. I'm ashamed of that. I let pride take the wheel. And for that, I'm sorry. I sat frozen, heart pounding in my ears. So that's why he had cut me off so easily. That's why he had built that icy wall between us. He had believed a lie. I found out the truth a month ago. My old accountant called. He finally saw the discrepancies. Someone had been shifting money between accounts. Not you, Brenda. I covered my mouth with one hand. It was her all along. That snake. She told Kyle, too, that you were a thief, that you were dangerous. I let her poison my memory of you. My body started to shake. I couldn't read anymore, but I forced myself to finish. So, I changed the will. Not out of guilt, but because it was the only thing I could still make right. I'm sorry it took me this long to see you. I hope one day you can forgive me. If not for who I was, then for who I tried to be at the end. Love always, Dad. I sat in the quiet of my room for a long time. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. He knew. He finally knew. All the years I'd spent wondering if he hated me, if he had chosen someone else over his own daughter. It wasn't just rejection, it was deception. But the damage had been done, and yet he tried to undo it at the very end. Truth doesn't erase pain, but it can rewrite the ending. My father's words now made more sense. At that moment, I understood that the envelope in my hand held not just a letter, but my father's attempt to rewrite a conclusion. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what that rewritten ending would entail. But I had a feeling this wasn't the end of it, because Brenda wasn't the kind of woman to lose quietly, and she sure as hell wouldn't go down without a fight. I didn't sleep that night, not because I didn't try, but because my father's letter kept playing in my head like a broken record. The words felt too big to hold in one place. She told Kyle, too. I believed her. I didn't even give you a chance. Grief has strange timing. You can bury someone, walk out of a funeral home, sit through a will reading, and still not fully feel it until you're alone with a letter that changes everything. By morning, my phone had 17 missed calls. 11 from Brenda, 4 from Kyle, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. And then came the knock. It wasn't the kind of knock neighbors give. It was sharp. Angry. I opened the door already knowing who I'd see. Brenda stood there in her black designer coat, lips painted in that cold crimson she wore like armor. Her face was calm, too calm, but her eyes were wildfire. "You knew what you were doing," she hissed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You came to that will reading knowing what he'd done." I closed the door behind her slowly. "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I didn't know, but now I do." She laughed, bitter and breathless. "You really think that letter changes anything? You think one pathetic apology at the end of his life gives you the right to take everything?" I didn't answer because it wasn't about taking anything. It was about finally being seen. She stepped closer. The scent of expensive perfume and venom was thick in the air. "You're not the victim here, Samantha. You were always a weak, always waiting to be saved. That's why your mother left him. That's why he picked me." That line hit deeper than I wanted it to. And she knew it. She always knew exactly where to aim. "You stole my son's future." She spat. "No," I replied quietly. "You did. When you lied to a dying man to get what you wanted. When you turned him against his own daughter." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't act like some innocent little martyr. You walked away, remember? You cut us off. You left." "I left," I snapped, "because you made that house feel like a war zone. Because I was tired of begging for scraps of love from a father too blind to see what was happening under his own roof." She went quiet at that. For a moment, the silence was almost human between us. And then she laughed again. "You think this is over?" she asked, taking a step back. "You think you've won?" "I didn't come here to win," I said, voice low. "I came because I was told I was still in the will." I didn't expect anything, but he gave it anyway. "I'll fight it," she said. "I have lawyers, connections. That man was not in his right mind, and I'll make sure a judge sees that." "He was clearer than ever," I replied. "He left receipts, letters, proof, and I've already handed copies to Granger." She paled, just for a second. That's when I realized she wasn't here to fight. She was here because she was afraid. Not of me, but of the truth. She turned, heading for the door. "You'll regret this," she said. "All of it." "I already regret a lot," I said softly, "but not this." She slammed the door behind her. And just like that, the house was quiet again. But this silence was different from the one before. This was the silence of a battle won, of truths coming to the surface. And I stood in the middle of that silence, thinking about what my father had left behind, and the truth that still felt too big, too raw. The next day, I drove to the family home, the one I now legally owned. I hadn't been back there since I was 21. The last time I stood on that porch, my father told me I was making a mistake by leaving. He said I'd never find anything better than blood. He was wrong. The house looked exactly the same. White shutters, stone path, the same heavy wooden door that had once stayed shut, while I cried on the front steps with a duffel bag at my feet. I stepped inside slowly. It was eerily clean. Too clean, like no one had lived here for months, just existed. Dust clung to the corners. A picture of Brenda and Kyle still hung above the fireplace. Not a single photo of me anywhere. I walked through the hallway like I was walking through someone else's memory. And then I saw it. On the desk in my father's study, right beneath the antique lamp he used to love. A notebook, worn leather cover, no label, No lock. I opened it. Page after page of my father's handwriting. Dates, observations, regrets. Saw Samantha's graduation photo in the paper. She looked so grown up. I wonder if she ever got my letter from 2014. Brenda says Samantha wants nothing to do with me. Hard to believe. Maybe she's right. Maybe I ruined it beyond repair. Tried to write her again. Couldn't find the words. Each entry felt like a stone added to my chest. He had tried. Even if he didn't send them, even if he didn't say it to my face, he thought about me. He missed me. Maybe that's not enough for some people. But for a girl who spent most of her 20s thinking she'd been erased, it meant everything. And as I stood in that house alone, surrounded by proof that my father had finally seen me, I knew Brenda wasn't done. She would come back. She would fight. But this time, I wasn't the girl crying on the porch. I was the one holding the keys. 3 days after Brenda stormed out of my apartment, I got the envelope in the mail. Certified heavy paper. Her lawyer's name printed across the front in sleek black font. Notice of intent to contest the will. Of course. It didn't matter that the documents were signed, witnessed, notarized. It didn't matter that my father had left proof, letters, even a video message Granger promised to reveal only if it came to trial. Brenda wouldn't go quietly. She was a woman who lived on control, and I had taken it away. I sat on the edge of the couch, the envelope still open in my lap, my coffee going cold beside me. I wasn't afraid of her. Not anymore. But I was exhausted. Exhausted by the weight of all of it. The past, the lies, the memories that clung to the walls of that house like mold I couldn't scrub clean. And maybe I was afraid of what came next. That night, I returned to the house again. Not because I needed to, but because I couldn't sleep unless I was surrounded by the pieces he left behind. His smell still lingered faintly. Old books, cedarwood, and ink. I walked back into his study, the notebook still sitting exactly where I'd left it. I hadn't read it all yet. Something in me was scared, too. But now, knowing that Brenda was building a case against me, I needed to understand more. Not just what my father regretted, but what else he knew. Why now? Why really? The journal opened easily to the middle. My finger stopped on a page with only a few lines, but the handwriting was different, shakier, uneven. August 3rd, talked to Margaret again. She said the lab confirmed it. The timeline, it doesn't lie. I was wrong about everything, about who Samantha really is. I blinked. Lab, timeline. I flipped forward. August 7th. I didn't want to believe it, but Margaret wouldn't lie. I kept the paternity results sealed in the filing cabinet. If she's right, if what we think is true, then Kyle isn't. The rest of the sentence was scribbled out. Ink dug into the page like he couldn't bear to finish it. I stared at the words, trying to piece them together. Margaret, that was his old secretary. She retired years ago, but I remembered her, sharp as a tack, always quiet, always watching. I had no idea they still spoke. Paternity results. I stood up, suddenly needing air. I paced the room, eyes scanning every shelf, every drawer. Then I remembered the filing cabinet, bottom drawer, the one that always stuck. It took everything I had to pull it open. But there it was, a thin manila envelope, unmarked except for a single word, confidential. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were two things. First, a printed lab report. I scanned the lines, heart hammering louder with each word. DNA analysis, 2 samples, one labeled KB, Kyle Bennett, it had to be. The other, AB, Arthur Bennett. Conclusion, no biological relationship found. I swallowed hard. Kyle wasn't my father's son. He never had been. I sat down slowly, the room tilting just slightly. Every memory I had of Brenda parading Kyle around like the perfect heir, every time my father brushed me aside to praise his son, it all snapped into a new brutal clarity. He didn't know, not until the very end. And when he did, he rewrote everything. My breath caught. The second item in the envelope was a letter, sealed. No address, just the word, "For Kyle." It wasn't open. I didn't read it. I couldn't. But just holding it in my hands made something in my chest shift. Because now I understood. This wasn't just about regrets. This was about truth, the kind that explodes quietly but leaves nothing untouched. The next day, I met with Mr. Granger. I handed him both the DNA results and the sealed letter. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing until he'd read the full report. "I see," he said slowly. "Well, this changes the landscape." "Can she still contest it?" I asked. He hesitated. "She'll try, but if this information becomes part of the record, her entire claim will fall apart. The will was amended based on a discovery your father documented. That discovery proves that the primary heir Brenda insisted on was never legally his child. There's no bloodline, no legal standing." I let the silence hang there. Granger leaned back in his chair. "It's up to you whether this becomes public," he added. "Your father didn't include this in the legal documentation, only in the notebook. Perhaps he hoped it wouldn't need to come to this." "Maybe," I said softly. "But Brenda has made it clear she won't stop." He nodded. "Then I'd advise we file it under sealed evidence, only released if the case proceeds." I agreed. But inside I was torn. Because I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to humiliate Kyle or even Brenda with this. I just wanted to be free of them, of their poison, of the years they stole. But if they wanted to take this to court, they were going to lose. Not because I wanted them to, but because the truth always wins eventually, even if it takes years to find its voice. The court date never came. Not because Brenda backed down willingly, but because her lawyer did. 2 weeks after I handed Mr. Granger the DNA results and my father's sealed letter, her attorney requested a meeting. According to Granger, once he reviewed the documents and saw the signatures, dates, and corresponding entries in my father's notebook, he advised Brenda to let it go. But Gloria didn't. She sent one last message, a letter, handwritten, no apology, no remorse, just a single line. "You stole everything, but don't think for a second you earned it." I didn't reply because I didn't need to prove anything to her. Not anymore. The house didn't feel like mine yet. It still whispered with voices from another life. His voice, her perfume, Kyle's laughter echoing down the hallways. But slowly, I began to make changes. I took down the pictures over the fireplace, boxed up old trophies, framed articles, anything that felt like a monument to someone else's story. And in their place, I added pieces of my own. A photo of Mom and me at the lake, a bookshelf filled with my favorite novels, dog-eared and stained with time, a painting I made in college that Dad once called deemed too abstract to be art. I hung it in the entryway. I think he would have smiled now if he saw it. Weeks passed, then a month, and just when I started to feel like maybe this chapter was over, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Samantha?" It was a woman's voice, soft, slightly raspy, familiar. "Yes? This is Margaret, your father's former secretary." My heart kicked. "He asked me not to contact you directly," she said. "He wanted to leave space, but after reading what you found, I think you deserve to know everything." I drove to meet her the next morning. She lived in a small brick house on the edge of town, surrounded by roses and silence. She welcomed me in with tea, then handed me a small cloth-bound folder. Inside were copies of emails, financial reports, calendar appointments, things she'd quietly collected over the years. "I kept these because I saw what was happening," she said, "but your father wouldn't hear it. Not then." As I flipped through the pages, the pattern became clear. Brenda had been slowly draining money from various accounts, reallocating assets, redirecting funds, even rerouting business income into private holdings under Kyle's name. She hadn't just manipulated him emotionally. She had nearly destroyed him financially. "He only began to question it last year," Margaret explained, "when one of the properties he thought he owned was listed under someone else's trust. He came to me in a panic. That's when I told him everything and the DNA test. He asked me to help him coordinate it. He didn't want to confront Brenda until he was sure. The day the results came in, he just sat there, quiet, staring at the paper. Did he cry? I asked. She shook her head. No, but he looked like a man who'd been holding his breath for 20 years. And finally exhaled. After I left her house, I didn't drive home right away. I stopped at the cemetery. It was raining, soft and steady, the kind of rain that doesn't chase you indoors, but invites you to linger. I stood by his headstone, fingers brushing the grooves of his name. Arthur Bennett, beloved husband, devoted father. I used to think that second line was a lie. Now, I think it was just incomplete. I got your letter, I whispered, and I believe you. I knelt, pulling a folded note from my coat. My own words this time. Just a few. You were wrong, but you tried to make it right, and that matters. We can't rewrite the past, but I'm learning how to live with the truth. Thank you for seeing me. Love, Samantha. I tucked the note into the base of the stone beneath a small rock, and I let the rain wash the rest away. A few days later, I got another letter. This one wasn't from Brenda. It was from Kyle. I don't know what to say, it began. I didn't know about any of it. I believed her. I believed everything she told me about you. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe it makes me guilty. I don't expect forgiveness, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. I didn't write back. Not yet, because I still didn't know what I wanted to say. But I folded the letter gently, placed it in the same drawer where I now kept my father's journal. Maybe one day I'd reply. Maybe not. But what I did know was this. I wasn't the child of a mistake. I was the daughter of a man who, at the very end, chose truth over pride. And I had survived more than anyone ever gave me credit for. If you've ever been erased, overlooked, or made to feel like your truth didn't matter, just know this. You are not invisible. And even if it takes years, the truth has a way of finding its way to light.